Good evening, Madam Consul General, dear Ms. Šavel Burkart, dear Dr. Cohen, dear Dr. Smrekar, ladies and gentlemen. We are currently experiencing how profoundly the world and its geography can change within a very short time. Conditions and connections long believed to be permanent can suddenly disappear while new paths emerge in their place. Such transformations also have and always have had historically a deep impact on the world of art. In the second half of the 19th century, the Munich Academy of Fine Arts rose to become one of the leading places for artistic education. Students such as Lovis Corinth, Franz Malk, and Wassily Kandinsky testify not only to the Academy's appeal, but also to its wide reach, which extended well into Eastern and Southeastern Europe. These connections, regrettably severed during the 20th century, most notably as a consequence of the Nazi regime, have fortunately been re-established and are once again receiving the attention they deserve. One important contribution to this renewed dialogue is the current exhibition about Slovenian Impressionists at the Dachau Picture Gallery. The exhibition recalls the strong interest Slovenian artists once had in Munich and its surroundings, while also demonstrating the vital contributions these artists made to Munich as a center of art. At the same time, the exhibition marks 50 years of cooperation between Bavaria and Slovenia. I'm particularly pleased that with this evening's event, the Zentralinstitut for Art History, with its long history of collecting Eastern European art literature, is likewise contributing to this partnership. We are examining today artistic exchange between Slovenia and Munich around 1900, and at the same time, we are strengthening present-day exchange by establishing a new fellowship for Slovenian art historians in Munich. I would like to express my sincerest thanks to my colleagues, Ms. Šavel Burkart and Dr. Cohen, as well as to the director of the National Gallery in Ljubljana, Dr. Jaki, for the excellent collaboration over the last months. We wish Dr. Jaki, who is unfortunately ill, a swift and full recovery. Many thanks also to you, Madam Consul General Shiftar, for being with us today and for agreeing to say a few words. And I wish everyone a most engaging and stimulating evening.
Good evening. Do you hear me? Dober večer, drage dame in gospodje. Good evening, my friends and lovers of Slovenian art. I didn't prepare official speech because I just wanted to share how this beautiful collaboration started in the first place. 5 years ago, I came here as a Consul General and I didn't have a clue who Anton Ashbel was. But it was a diplomatic task that I do something about it. And later what I learned and how we all came together is that he was actually extraordinarily cool guy who had his own academy and where also at that time women could learn, and it was officially approved program by academy. So I think that was extremely cool for the 19th century. And of course he taught many other famous people, but I will not go too deep into that. We have many experts on this behalf here. However, my part was intrigued by my dear colleague, Saša Šavel Burkart, the head of Slovenian Cultural Center in Berlin, who is also cultural attaché at our embassy, that we do something about it. And she, being an expert on the modern Slovenian art, knew much more about it. So finally, she visited the Dachau Gemäldegalerie And we found a friend there who very quickly agreed to have an exhibition of Slovenian Impressionists who were working in the past in Dachau, Munich, and all over the Bavaria, actually. So on this behalf, I would like to thank Laura Cohen for doing the magic from the Bavarian side. Thank you very much. And then we realized that we realized there is so much about Anton Ashbeck here that we don't really know about it. And among that, we discover, unfortunately, director of Narodna Galerija, Madam Jaki, who's ill today and couldn't attend. She visited, and Saša and her and myself, we discovered the grave of Anton Ashbeck, and all details I'm sure our experts will follow. And then there is this bust of him here in one beautiful park. And that's how I got involved with the work of a former director of National Gallery of Slovenia, Dr. Smrekar, who will also be one of the speakers, because he cooked all this together in the first place. So, last but not least, our trip our little trip with Madam Jaki and my dear friend Saša. We went to Zentralinstitut für Kunstgeschichte and realized that you didn't actually know much about Slovenian Impressionists here in Bavaria. And I am very happy that after today you will know much more. But for this wonderful collaboration, I would like to thank Dr. Ulrich Pfisterer and, of course, to Mr. Dominik Brabant, who will be one of the speakers on behalf of the Institute. I want to tell you that because as far as I could tell, more than half are not Slovenians. So just one little information how important Bavaria is for Slovenia. Our first author of Slovenian first book and our greatest author, establisher of Slovenian language, Primož Trubar, who was a Protestant priest, was actually working in Bavaria. And he published the books later in Baden-Württemberg, in Tübingen, but they say that the majority of his works were actually done here in Bavaria. So and that was 15th century, 16th century, exactly. Yeah. But later I realized in this discovery process that our biggest and the most successful authors, artists, like those who will be introduced today, like Ivana Kobilica and others, were also creating here. So I just want to tell you that Slovenians are very thankful for all the opportunities that we had in our past, that we created our beautiful works, and I'm sure that today's event will also show how lucky you are that you got the best minds and talents of Slovenia to hear, who contributed to this society. I don't want to be long, but I want to thank also Gemäldegalerie Dachau for exhibiting this wonderful exhibition, Beyond Impressionism, Slovenian Modernism and Dachau, which will be open until the mid of April. It's really extremely beautiful exhibition, and I think, I am sure you will not be sorry to visit it. I invite you from the bottom of my heart, and I wish this panel to be the story of love, because Slovenia is the only country in the world that has love in its name. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best.
Dober večer, guten Abend, good evening. This panel will take place in English language, as we see, because due to the fact that Dr. Andrej Smrekar is here with us and it's easier for the communication because we don't have a dolmetscher available. And yes, I would also thank you very much, Maša Šiftar and Professor Ulrich Pfisterer, dear colleagues, dear participants, dear guests. I'm very grateful also to the Zentralinstitut für Kunstgeschichte for hosting tonight's symposium, which also forms part of the accompanying program of the exhibition Beyond Impressionism, Slovenian Modernism and Dachau. As I said, thank you also Maša Šiftar, Consul General to the Republic of Slovenia, and all the support by the consulate. I also thank Dr. Andrej Smrekar for coming for this event from Ljubljana. Dr. Andrej Smrekar is one of the most renowned Slovenian art historian. And of course, thank you, Laura Kohn, for everything. Without you, this would not be possible. The exhibition in Dachau is the result of the international cooperation and partnership between the National Gallery of Slovenia, the Gemäldegalerie Dachau, and Slovenian Cultural Center, Berlin. It is the first presentation of Slovenian Impressionists and Realists after almost 40 years in Germany. The first exhibition was in Wiesbaden, end of 80s, and first exhibition of some of the works in Germany. It is therefore only fitting that it is accompanied by a scholarly discussion entitled Slovenian Impressionists in Munich and Dachau, and what did Kandinsky have to do with it? Anton Ashbe, revealed by Maša Šiftar, the Slovenian painter and influential teacher, was described by his student Vasily Kandinsky, I quote, "Deeply lonely man, unable to laugh, yet, as everyone knew, endowed with a noble and profoundly empathetic heart. Today, he and his, at that time, one of the most renowned art schools, are forgotten. The same is true for Ivana Kubilca, the greatest Slovenian woman painter. She lived, studied, exhibited, and worked in Munich for almost a decade, also in Berlin for almost a decade, showing her work among many other places at the Glaspalast, engaging with the artistic circles of her time, and yet she's virtually unknown here today." It was in Munich that the Slovenian Impressionists, Richard Jakupić, Ivan Grohar, Matija Jama, and Matej Sternen were formed. In Slovenia, they are considered foundational figures, artists who helped to shape modern Slovenian art and, importantly, contributed in the formation of Slovenian national identity around 1900. And yet, here in Munich, the city that shaped them, they remain largely absent from the museum walls, from the collections and public consciousness. Why is that so? In May 24, I visited the Gemäldegalerie Dachau. For the first time, I was welcomed by Laura Kohn, who introduced me to the remarkable collection related to the Dachau artist colony and the German painters who depicted the surrounding landscape. I proposed a collaboration. From the very beginning, Dr. Kohn expressed strong interest in presenting Slovenian Impressionists in Dachau. She visited Ljubljana and the National Gallery, and soon discovered that very little scholarly literature existed on this topic here in Germany, and began her own research, uncovering striking parallels, similarities, and connections. And this is why this exhibition in Dachau and tonight's event is so important. The exhibition presents, as mentioned, these works for the first time in Bavaria. And the colloquium is important because it has a great symbolic and scholarly importance. So let me now introduce the speakers. Dr. Laura Kohn, since 2024 director of the Gemäldegalerie Dachau and curator of the exhibition, who will begin with brief insights into the exhibition and its research context. After studying art history, Laura Kohn earned her doctorate in Bonn and worked in various museums, including as an art educator at the Bundeskunsthalle Bonn and as a research associate at the Bavarian State Painting Collections. At the Jewish Museum Cologne, she led projects and curated key programs for the nationwide festival celebrating Jewish life in Germany. Her short lecture bears the title, Beyond Impressionism, Slovenian Modernism and Dachau, Brief Insights into the Exhibition. Please welcome Dr. Laura Kohn. The floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here. I would also, first of all, like to thank Saša, Šavel, Burkart, the director of the Slovenian Cultural Center, Berlin. Perfect, thank you very much. For the initiative for this event, and therefore also a big thank you to Ulrich Pfisterer, who made it possible. Thanks also to Barbara Falterer for the excellent and friendly organization of the event. Yeah, when Saša told me about Slovenian art and landscape painting at the turn of the century and Slovenian Impressionism, I did a little research and first came across Anton Așbe, Slovenian artist who came to Munich at the end of the 19th century to study at the art academy there. I saw his paintings and was immediately impressed, personally speaking, by his art. And it then turned out that he was, so to speak, the starting point for many other Slovenian artists who studied with him. I'll go into more detail about that in a moment. So also including the Slovenian Impressionists, who are the main focus of this evening's discussion. And what made me even more interested, this time from a professional perspective, was the fact that I came across a short essay by Donovan Pavlinec, which points to specific references from the Slovenian Impressionists to Munich-based artists, the Dachau artists colony, and its influence on the Slovenian artists. For me, 3 chapters quickly emerged, which are important for this connection between Slovenian modernism and Munich and Dachau. And this is also how the exhibition is structured, which I would now like to present in a little more detail. As I already mentioned, Anton Așbe is a key figure who is important for the further development of Slovenian modernism and thus also for the development of Slovenian Impressionism. Așbe was a very small, frail man with a spinal injury who was unsuited to either farming or commerce. So he apprenticed himself to the Slovenian painter Janez Wolf, who eventually reached a point where he could teach him no more and advised him to go abroad to continue his studies. The first stop was Vienna, as it was for many Slovenian artists who wanted to escape the limitations of the art world in their own country. And in the homeland, they were mainly only able to paint for rich, wealthy citizens or work for the church. However, Vienna was still conservative at the time, so many moved on to Munich after a short stay. At the end of the 19th century, Munich was a vibrant metropolis that must have been very inspiring, especially in the arts and culture. We all know the stories of the Schwabing bohemian life and the sociable life that artists lived here. Anton Așbe enrolled at the Munich Academy and quickly became well known among his fellow students because he was such a talented artist that he was always asked to correct their drawings. 2 of his fellow countrymen, Ferdo Vesel and Richard Jakopič, encouraged him to start his own painting school, which he did. In 1891, he opened his painting school in Schwabing, which quickly became one of the most famous and largest painting schools in Munich. And this is remarkable because there were quite a few painting schools at the time, and Anton Așbe, for reasons unknown to me, somehow ended up falling into obscurity and is unjustly little known or even unknown in Munich and beyond. We would like to change that here. Aschberg's school had up to 100 pupils at time, including some well-known names. 3 guesses as to who was there as well. Yes, exactly, Wassily Kandinsky. And also Alexei von Jawlensky. So Kandinsky and Jawlensky actually got to know each other at Aschberg's school. And also Marianne von Werefkin, but also Franziska Gräfin von Reventlow and a few painters from the Dachau artists colony, and above all, the 4 Slovenian artists who later became the Slovenian Impressionists. So when we look at Aschberg's works, we quickly realize that he was strongly rooted in Munich Realism and also greatly influenced by Wilhelm Leibl and his circle. This is where it gets interesting. So how can it be that the teacher Aschberg was strongly rooted in Munich Realism while his students all worked very differently and developed in completely different directions? This was because Aschberg strongly encouraged this. He wanted everyone to go their own way, to find their own individual expression and to realize their full potential. To this end, Aschberg motivated his students with his motto, "Go ahead, be bold." They were encouraged to apply lots of paint to the canvas with great energy, because only in this way they could could their individual style of expression emerge. So we will probably hear more about this later, how the Impressionists individually implemented this teaching. So how does the connection to Dachau come about? Anton Aschberg was the crucial personality here as well. While studying at the academy, he got to know several artists who not only played an important role at the academy and in Munich's art scene, but were also important for the Dachau artists colony. Perhaps a brief word about the Dachau artists colony. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, it was something of a hotspot for landscape painting. Artists wanted to move away from historical and studio paintings and instead go out into nature and paint in the open air. Especially during this period, with industrialization, ever-increasing mobility, and factory work, everything became faster and cities became more crowded, and so artists longed for untouched nature. They began to travel out to the countryside to paint and capture what they perceived as untouched nature and the supposedly peaceful world of the countryside. It was all about nature, the play of light, and the rural population with their traditional costumes and customs. Munich artists found this just outside of the city, in Dachau and the Dachau marshlands. With its high humidity, a marshland offers rapidly changing light conditions and also has unique flora and fauna. That is why many Munich artists were also in Dachau, some of them returning again and again, some settling there for longer periods or even building houses and staying there. Many well-known artists were also present here, including Lovis Corinth, whom we will hear more about today. Returning to Aschberg, we know that he was in contact with a number of artists and was even very good friends with some of them. Some of these artists were also important persons in the Dachau artists colony. For example, he was friends with Max Liebermann, Heinrich von Zügel, and Fritz von Ude. He often invited them to his painting school so that his students could learn from them and get to know their works. In addition, as already mentioned, it was common practice at the time to go out into the countryside and take trips to the surrounding area, especially to Dachau. So Aschberg's students did just that, including the Slovenian artists who would become the 4 main representatives of Slovenian Impressionism. This inevitably brought them into contact with the 3 so-called Neu-Dachauer, the new Dachau artists, who made the Dachau artists colony famous. It's Adolf Hölzl, Arthur Langhammer, and Ludwig Dill, but more on that in a moment. Let's return briefly to the exhibition. So the first part shows works by Aschberg and 2 other important Slovenian artists who were also still rooted in realism, but were already making their own way toward modernism. It's Ivana Kobilca and Ferdo Vesel. Ferdo Vesel was friends with Aschberg, but did not attend his school, instead founding his own. Vesel was also very close friends with Ivana Kobilca, the most important female artist of Slovenian modernism. Vesel shared a studio with her, and rumor says that they were also a couple at times, so we don't know, but it's rumor. The two traveled together through their homeland and were interested in motifs from the countryside, the people, their clothing, and their traditions. Actually, we were supposed to hear a lecture on Ivana Kobilca today, but unfortunately it has been cancelled also due to illness. So here are just a few words about her. This is a portrait of Ferdo Vesel from Ivana Kobilca. Since women were not admitted to academies, they were only allowed to study there from around 1920 onwards. Ivana Kobilca was self-taught, visiting museums and copying old masters. From 1881, she was also in Munich and attended Alois Ertel's private painting school. In Munich, she met Fritz von Ude, who had a decisive influence on her painting. Through him, her palette became significantly brighter and friendlier, and it was also him who advised her to go to Paris. There she came into contact with French Impressionism and also lived in Barbizon for a while. This period is also referred to as her blue phase because she used many shades of violet and blue. Kobilca was already very successful during her lifetime, receiving numerous public commissions and exhibiting internationally, including the Venice Biennale. She was a very self-confident and strong woman, and I think the photo speaks for itself. The first section of the exhibition is, so to speak, the foundation for the further development of Slovenian modernism from realism to impressionism. Here we see what Slovenian artists found in Munich. We get to know their teacher and what inspirations and influences they took with them from here on their own paths. In the second part of the exhibition, we then get to know the four main representatives of Slovenian Impressionism. And I just show you some of the paintings just to have a short impression and overview from the four main representatives and their development. So this is Richard Jakopič. The second is Matija Jama, Matej Sternen, and Ivan Grohar. In the exhibition, we show how differently they applied what they learned at Așbe. We also show how their art evolved over time, and it becomes, I hope so, very clear which other modern trends can be found in their works. But we will hear more about that from Dr. Smrekar in a moment. But I would just like to briefly show two works that particularly well illustrate the close connection to Dachau. So we can assume that, as was customary at the time, when the Slovenians also took trips to the countryside and to Dachau, they also came into contact with works by the three most important artists in the Dachau artist colony, as we have seen, Hölzel, Langhammer, and Dill. Especially Matija Jama felt particularly at home in Heimhausen, that's near Dachau, and he settled there for a while and painted in the Dachau marshland. Here we see a work that specifically depicts a landscape on the Amper River and is also titled as such as the Amper landscape. If we now look at another work, this time by Matej Sternen, it strongly reminds us of the works by Ludwig Dill. In the permanent exhibition in the picture gallery, there are some paintings that can be compared very well with it, like this one. This is from Ludwig Dill, The Juniper in the Marshlands. And although we don't know exactly where this landscape with water from Sternen was created, we can well imagine that it was also created somewhere in the Dachau marshlands. Matej Sternen was also friends with Richard Graeff. He's known as an artist from the Dachau artists colony, but he first studied at Așbe school, where he got to know Matej Sternen. They were friends throughout their lives, and there are many letters that they wrote to each other. And in a letter, Graeff reflects on the good old times with good old Tony, Anton Așbe. However, as we are about to hear the lecture by the expert on Slovenian Impressionism, I do not want to go into this part in detail, but for the complete picture of the exhibition, I would like to briefly present the third part of it. Yeah, Slovenian modernism does not end with Impressionism. And the connection to Dachau is not only the artists' colony, but also the dark history of Dachau with its concentration camp. One of the most important Slovenian modern artists is Zoran Mušić. His tragic connection is the Dachau concentration camp where he was imprisoned. These experiences had such a profound effect on him that his paintings almost consistently reflect these memories. The images he had to see there, the experiences he had to endure there, burned themselves so deeply into his mind that they run through almost his entire oeuvre. Even in seemingly harmless plant motifs, such as this root structure, they remind us of the images we know from photos of the concentration camp. It was important to us to show this connection as well, because the history of Slovenian modernism is shaped by it, just as is the history of the Dachau and the artists' colony. There were certainly artists who still lived and worked there in the 30s and 40s and who were more or less involved with the regime and the events. So history cannot be separated, so it should also be part of the exhibition. But in some of Zoran Mušić's works, however, light is also particularly important, as in his series on cathedrals. He was fascinated by how light falls through the windows and dissolves the shapes and contours inside the cathedral, making them soft. Here we also have a good opportunity to return to Impressionism, where light plays the most important roles. So when you think about Impressionism, the first thing that comes to mind is France and Monet. Then perhaps German Impressionism with Liebermann, Corinth and Slevogt comes to mind. And then there are many other forms of Impressionism. It can be seen as a European phenomenon. Perhaps it's also a connecting element between the different countries, which all find their own language and expression in art, but whose zeitgeist is similar or even the same. What is particularly interesting is the network of artists who were very mobile, traveled a lot, and drew inspiration from everywhere. That is why we have called our exhibition Wege des Impressionismus in German. It is the path to get there, the many stages, the development, the influences, but it is also the different paths that can be taken and the different languages that have developed within this Impressionism. In English, the exhibition is called Beyond Impressionism because it goes beyond that and artistic languages are constantly evolving. The exhibition shows how different the styles were even among the representatives of Slovenian Impressionism and which modern trends played a role there. To close my short keynote lecture, I think that we are in the right setting here to perhaps conclude with the following note. Yeah, as is unfortunately always the case with exhibitions, at least in smaller museums such as ours, we don't have enough time to really go into depth. So that's why the exhibition and our catalog can be seen as an inspiration for further research in this area. There are still many unanswered questions, and there are certainly many sources that can be searched to examine this connection between the Slovenian Impressionists and Munich and Dachau in more detail. So I think we would all be delighted if this were to be investigated further. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Laura, for this wonderful insight into the exhibition and the connections and the stories of the Slovenian artists that were living and working here. Our next speaker is Dr. Andrej Smrekar, one of the Slovenian's leading art historians, former director of the National Gallery of Ljubljana and Božidar Jakac's Gallery in Kostanjevica, author of numerous seminal studies on Slovenian Impressionism and modern art, amongst other themes. He obtained his PhD at the Harvard University. He's a long-standing member of the Slovenian Museum Association, which he chaired from 2003 to 2011. And Andrej Smrekar is also the author of numerous articles on Slovenian Impressionists and Expressionists, many exhibitions and monographic studies on 20th century Slovenian artists, early Slovenian printmaking and drawing, and works from the collections of the National Gallery. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely honored to be part of this roundtable tonight. I would like to express my deep gratitude to everybody who made this event possible. Because as you've heard earlier, we tried to make the presence of Anton Ashbe known here in Munich decades ago by bringing his monument to Leopold's Park, to the very spot where the wooden house built by Duke Szczerbatov stood and was used by Ashbe as his school. And I'm happy that this process is going on, and I'm looking forward to further events that would make this connection of Slovenian painting tradition and Munich painting better known. The fragment chosen by the director of the National Gallery of Slovenia, Barbara Jaki, for the title of this presentation comes from Ivan Cankar's report on the 1904 exhibition of Slovenian Impressionist painters. The exhibition took place in late February at the prestigious Salon Mitke in Vienna. They exhibited under the title Freie Vereinigung Sava Slovenische Künstler, to dissociate themselves from the Slovenian Artists' Society. Cankar referred to Ivan Grohar's painting Springtime, the painting you see. The whole sentence reads, "Here in the large bright hall, my heart soared at the sight of those colorful fields bathed in spring sunlight, of those rolling hills, and it seemed to me as if Grohar had poured onto the canvas all the joyful beauty of Slovenian land and all its melancholy at once." The exhibition and this particular painting marked the turning point in both stylistic development and the reception of modern art in Carniola, and subsequently in the broader region today known as Slovenia. The process that led to this important landmark, however, began in Munich in the 1890s. By that time, Munich existed in public imagination at the southern slopes of the Alps as the Isar Athens, a phrase that still appears today in popular culture. From the early 1880s, Slovenian artists preferred Munich public and private schools to Vienna's for their training. Anton Ashbe, Ferdo Vesel, and Ivana Kubilca went to Munich after their initial training in Vienna. Richard Jakovic followed, as the first three were finishing their studies, arriving in time to take part in the formation of the Ashbe School in 1890. Jakovic registered at the Munich Academy, but left after a month to work with Ashbe. He initially shared an apartment with Ferdo Vesel and befriended Matija Jama, who attended Simon Holoszy's private art school. Little is known about their achievements in those years, but they witnessed the vigorous developments introduced by the Munich secession, international exhibitions, art magazines, the growing importance of plein air painting, which entered as well the academic curriculum, the rise of the new Dachau school, and the growing body of international students, all fertile ground for advancing young talent. Discouraged by poor critical reception of his works shown with the Künstlervereinigung. Jakupić gave up painting in 1893. Jama abandoned his endeavors due to lack of funds. They returned to Munich 4 years later to attend Ashbest School, both focused on, now on landscape and genre painting. They alternated use of the same Munich apartment, which provoked intense correspondence that kept them informed even when away from the city. When together at home in Ljubljana, they explored the edges of the Ljubljana Marsh, producing numerous studies, sometimes recast as large-scale pictures in Jakupić's oeuvre. Stranska Vas, a small village west of Ljubljana, was a place Jakupić repeatedly visited as late as 1905, lodging in the local tavern. There he began to identify motifs that reappeared in variations of atmosphere and mood, and later resurfaced as settings in his figurative paintings. I believe certain affinities existed between landscapes of Dachau Moor and the Ljubljana Marsh. Matija Jama continued painting in Heimhausen near Dachau until 1904, when financial problems forced him to seek cheaper arrangements closer to home. He bought a bicycle and explored territories west of Zagreb, along the Sotla and Sava rivers, and some 70 kilometers south, past Karlovac, in obsessive search of the right motif. In his mind's eye, he sought the type of landscape experienced in Dachau and continued to pursue it even after moving to Lower Austria, south of Vienna. In Gerasdorf and Luxembourg, he still followed the compositional patterns of Munich painting, even when combined with Impressionist color scheme and pointillist brushwork. The character of his landscapes changed only upon his arrival in Dürnstein and Krems. On the other hand, there were organizational models provided by Munich's art world. As late as 1899, a group of artists and writers founded the Slovenian Artists Association in Ljubljana, in which Jakupić and Jama took part. A year later, their exhibition united members working in diverse parts of the empire and abroad. Jakupić, Jama, Matej Strnin and Ivan Grohar gathered at Ashbest School in 1899 and published an article announcing their return to Ljubljana as young Slovenian painters. The author's pseudonym Artifex was most probably Jama's. That exhibition was the first overview of Slovenian artists' production and revived in public discourse the question of whether Slovenian art existed, and if not, who could create it? Already at the second exhibition, the young painters usurped the hanging committee and subjected the entries to a selective process following the example of Munich secession. The consequence of their decision was the abstention of certain older established artists, Ivana Kubilca among them. The exhibition, dominated by landscape studies and marked by disproportionate participation of hanging committee members, provoked dissatisfaction and was prematurely closed. The press delighted in disqualifying the young artists as incompetent, their paintings as mere studies, unfit for public display, and them as strangers peddling latest fashion from abroad. The outcome was disastrous for most of them. They were left without means of existence, particularly Grohar, who spent all his borrowed money producing 2 large new canvases with rural subjects, haymaking, and lunchtime in the fields modeled on Giovanni Segantini's compositions. They realized there was no audience in Ljubljana for their art, and they had to look for a new public elsewhere. With limited resources, they had no choice but to move to the countryside where living was cheaper. Jakupić lodged with his fiancée's family in Škofja Loka. Grohar joined him in spring of 1904. Strnin took on restoration projects in warmer part of the year in vicinity of Škofja Loka for Zentralkommission für Denkmalpflege, while Jama painted in Heimhausen. Seeking a new audience, they turned to Vienna. The exhibition policy of the Munich secession offered first-hand contact with the international artistic tendencies that complemented the reproductions in art magazines. Jama and Jakopić were able to see several of Monet's paintings between 1897 and 1900, which they discussed in their correspondence. Yet until 1903, exhibitions, the development of Impressionism in painting and sculpture at the Vienna Secession in winter, and the presentation of Monet's works later that year in the Phalanx in Munich, their own work did not show a substantial impact of French painting. The mediators were the German Impressionists and the Munich Secession. In 1903, the reaction of Slovenian painters was immediate. While Monet's haystacks of 1900 did not affect Jama in the way they moved Kandinsky, an analogous motif appeared twice in Jama's work a year after Phalanx exhibition. Jama preferred a clearly rounded composition and orderly, discrete brushstroke that registered visual facts and animated natural phenomena. Above all, however, he was concerned with achieving a general unifying tone that rendered the painting somewhat distanced. Many of these qualities are already evident in his birches you've seen earlier in 1901, which revealed the influence of Munich painting. The garden shows a heightened orderliness of brushwork, an expanded palette of local colors, particularly in shaded areas, and convincing density of summer atmosphere along the wicker fence zigzagging towards the horizon. The bridge on the Dobra engages more directly with compositional solutions of Monet and Sisley. The sharp diagonal of the bridge, reflections in the water, and sunlight beneath the arches, however, lack the elegance of the French models. The local colors suggest a synesthetic registration of atmosphere through contrasts of blue and yellow, orange and violet, extended by green. Jama himself spoke of the movement of cold air in shadows above the water, countered by warmth of sunbeams under the bridge and the illuminated hillside in the background. This rational distance suggests that Jama painted with a system in mind, allowing no emotional interference. Jakopić, by contrast, was a very different character. Open to experimentation, he observed his motifs with ecstatic intensity. He painted with vigorous urgency and emotional force in order to register his sensations. The red-green contrast of plowed fields running towards the Kamnitny hill is executed with long, energetic strokes. The cloudy sky of a rainy day is not defined by the shapes of clouds, but by the movement of brushstrokes. In 1907, Jakopić relocated from Škofja Loka to Ljubljana, where he began working on the construction of the art pavilion, the first public exhibition space in the city. It is at its opening exhibition in 1909, he presented, among other works, a series of views of the monastery of the Teutonic Order, as seen from his second-floor apartment window in Ljubljana. Križanka in Autumn is one of the earliest registrations of this motif and represents an extraordinary example of Jakopić's ecstatic vision. The individual paintings in the exhibition were furnished with titles describing weather conditions: fresh snow, rainy day, foggy morning, clear skies, and so forth. Jakopić suggestively combined variations of brushstroke with appropriate color compositions to register intimate contemplation of the motif under changing conditions of time and seasons. He did not settle for objective registration of the visible world. Painting for him was an intimate experience of reality, which he described as the deepest revelations of the human soul. Matej Strnin was something of a latecomer. He completed his studies at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts and worked independently between 1897 and 1999, when he spent the autumn term in Munich with Anton Ashbe. The Munich emphasis on broad brushwork and thick impasto immediately transformed his art. Seeking to perfect his painterly skills, Sternin remained with Ashbe until the latter's death in 1905 and returned to Carniola a year later. Sternin's interest in landscape was largely incidental. In early exhibitions, he was primarily identified as a portrait and figure painting or genre painter. His work was the least influenced by French Impressionism among his colleagues. He expressed interest in Whistler and mentioned Anders Zorn and Ignacio Zuluaga, though his closest artistic affinities were predominantly with German painters. The redhead marked the conclusion of his formal studies. The painting depicts a female nude seen from behind, set against counterlight. In its modeling, one can reconstruct Sternin's understanding of crystallization of color. This approach, according to Sternin, required loading of broad brush with colors selected not across the color wheel, but by proximity, enabling the painter to draw and model with the same gesture simultaneously. Excuse me. In this nude, as well as in his subsequent practice, Sternin paid a little attention to the psychology of his models. His paintings focused instead on surface, on material properties rendered as a suggestive artifice. On the Divan likely marked his return to Ljubljana in 1912 and asserted his position with local bourgeois society. By introducing the salon nude into Slovenian tradition, Sternin affirmed his artistic ambitions. He returned to Munich for several months in 1914, shortly before the outbreak of the Great War. Grohar joined the group of at Jakobic's initiative. He worked briefly in Munich to produce 2 large altar paintings for the National Pilgrimage Church at Brezje. Under Jakobic's influence, he decisively turned to landscape painting in 1901, after being deprived of a major church commission. Grohar found a kindred figure in Giovanni Segantini, owing in part to their similar social origins. His creative engagement with Segantini's work began in 1903, when he developed his own distinctive technique, one that does not quite imitate Segantini's divisionism. Critics at the Mitke exhibition in 1904 admired Grohar's audacity and vitality, which enabled him to achieve highly lyrical effects through a seemingly crude manner of painting. Spring was conceived with a Viennese audience in mind, and simbolically, and simultaneously functioned as an autobiographical expression of the artist's emotional healing through nature. If spring marked the beginning of Slovenian Impressionism, the sower signaled its conclusion. Through close collaboration with Jakobic, sharing both subjects and expertise, Grohar managed to discipline the anarchic technique of spring, allowing him once again to include a figure within the landscape. August Berthold's bichromat print of the sower helped him resolve the problem of the undrawn contour. Grohar applied his own kind of impressionist technique to a programmatically defined subject, enriched with symbolic forms. Grohar saw a sower against the sky, which recalls Van Gogh's vision of a sower silhouetted against the sun. The remainder was developed in the studio with the aid of photography, and it took him close to 2 years to complete the painting. The hayrack in the middle ground functions as an attribute that identifies the man as Slovenian sower. The uniform treatment of figure and ground, locking the human form into a continuous edge-to-edge surface, binds the man to the soil he cultivates. He seems to grow out of it. Both are made of the same substance. The grand gesture of the sacred ritual of fertilizing the earth, characterized by rhythmic repetition, alludes to the painter's own gesture of pressing thickened paintballs into the canvas with palette knife. The work thus becomes an image of national identification and simultaneously of modernist self-referentiality. Grochar-Sauer visualized Ivan Cankar's claim that painting requires no particular subject. It barely depends on the motif. Quote, it barely depends on the motif. It depends above all on feeling, on that Stimmung possessed only by a Slovenian artist and no one else. Unquote. The sole condition of a distinction is a distinction, recognizability, which enabled Viennese critics to speak of Slovenian art as related to the character of landscape on the sunny side of the Alps. The distinction arose from German Impressionism, informed by direct exposure to French Impressionist painting. Jakobic's engagement did not end with painting. He was deeply interested in local tradition, and in 1910, after a 2-year delay, he mounted the Kaiser Jubiläumsausstellung, a historical exhibition aimed at reconstructing the tradition from around, local tradition from around 1800 onward. A similar objective underpinned the exhibition held at Belvedere last year in Vienna, in which Markus Fehlinger sought to identify the system of color composition operative during the same period. Jakobic's intuitive approach to history later found an extension in Frances Tellez's geographical method, which attempted to trace connective features linking the late Middle Ages, the 18th century, and the modernist tradition in Carniola. Tomáš Brejc summarized the contribution of Slovenian Impressionist painters in his landmark dissertation published in 1982 as follows. Between 1900 and 1914, the Slovenian Impressionists accomplished a great deal of creative work. First, they remedied the deficiency of painting tradition, especially that of romantic painting, evident in a more intense use of color, in a personal choice of subject matter, and in subjectively motivated interpretation. Second, they institutionalized modernism in a social sense by organizing exhibition of forming art societies and their secessions, such as the Sava Club. Third, they built the visual foundation of modernism on which Slovenian painting could develop in the 20th century. And fourth, they established a specific Slovenian painting culture within European context. Thank you.
Hvala lepa, Dr. Smrekar. Thank you very much, Dr. Smrekar. The next speaker is Dr. Dominik Brabant, the Deputy Director of the Institute here and art historian and scholar of 19th and early 20th century art with a focus on modern sculpture, art criticism, and Munich's artistic landscape. Since 2025, he is also co-editor of Seepunkte magazine. He studied art history at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich and the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and completed his doctorate in Paris. Since 2011, he has been affiliated with the chair of art history at the University of Eichstätt, Ingolstadt, where he taught for many years as a lecturer. In 2022-23, he served as a deputy professor for early modern to modern art history at the Heinrich Heine Universität in Düsseldorf. His latest exhibition is about Lovis Corinth, Korinthenwerden, here at the Institute in the second floor, which you can also visit. And now I give floor to you, Mr. Brabant. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ms. Šavel Burkart, for this very kind introduction. And as you've heard, I'm not an expert on Slovenian Impressionism, but I worked on Lovis Corinth, and so my task for this evening will be to try to give a bit of a different context, more based on Munich. When we ask what role Impressionism played in Germany, and more fundamentally whether something like a specifically German Impressionism existed at all, one that also mattered for artists from Slovenia, Lovis Corinth emerges as an exemplary, indeed symptomatic case, or as one could say, as a prism through which many developments and artistic conflicts of the time become visible. My central argument, not yet. Yeah, now it works. My central argument is that Corinth demonstrates how Impressionism in Germany did not arise primarily through direct engagement with French Impressionist painting, but rather through a complex constellation of academic traditions, institutional structures, traveling routes, so Wege des Impressionismus, as Laura Kohn has already said, new anti-academic approaches to art, with Munich functioning as a crucial mediating center. This constellation was equally formative for artists from Slovenia, who trained there, as we heard today, in the late 19th century. Corinth's biography and artistic production up to around 1901, when he shifted his center of life from Munich to Berlin, reflects the developments, conflicts, and ambivalences that characterize the Munich art scene from the 1880s to the turn of the century. At the same time, Corinth is particularly valuable as a case study because of his extensive autobiographical writings, also about Munich, of course. His essay collection Legenden aus dem Künstlerleben and his autobiography, published posthumously in 1926, provide insight into how his generation perceived the European art scene and the transformations of pictorial languages that has been underway since the mid-19th century. These texts, always written between immediate remembrance of events past and a rhetoric of ironic distancing from oneself, make visible not only which artists and developments were considered formative, but also which processes remained marginal and were largely overlooked. This perspective also informs the current exhibition Becoming Corinth, the Artist and Art History at the Zentralinstitut, which foregrounds the way in which Corinth's artistic identity has been constructed through texts like the ones mentioned, exhibitions, and scholarly narratives. Corinth's significance then lies not only in his work, but also in what his career reveals about how art history itself is made. And I think that might also be a very interesting question when we talk about how Slovenian art history has been made. We find in his early work, starting in 1879, some female nudes. The first one from 1883, the one on the screen from 1885, mostly with a brownish color palette, but also starting about 1889, quite a lot of huge history paintings with religious and mythological themes that reflect Corinth's attempt to become an important painter. It is generally agreed that in his Munich period until 1901, Corinth only casually in some works engaged with an impressionistic idiom, especially in paintings executed probably in plein air manner, like Waldinneres in Bernried, which shows a keen interest for glistening light effects in an otherwise unspectacular corner of nature. Other works, like Fräulein Heck im Kahn from 1897, seem at least to me not conceivable without the knowledge of Manet. Therefore, I would like to doubt Stefan Koya's claim that Corinth did not into contact with Manet a year or two later in Berlin, but just as a side note. Paintings like Wirtshausgarten am Pregel bei Königsberg from 1893 hint to motifs of leisure time, but also solitude in suburban sceneries we also know from Impressionism, painted with a spontaneous seeming brush. If I show you, just as a note, if I show you black and white images of Corinth's paintings, it usually means that we do not know about their whereabouts. However, Berlin, where he moved in 1901, with his gallery system and its greater openness to new pictorial languages, offered improved professional prospects. And Corinth's move in 1901 must be understood against this backdrop. Only in his Berlin period, his paintings fully developed a style that can be called a German version of Impressionism. But at the same time, he was always in touch with the painterly tradition of paintings developed by Rubens, Rembrandt, Velázquez, and others. Yet before Berlin, Munich was the decisive site in which his artistic orientation took shape. Moreover, his 3-year stay in Paris was important for him and the development of what should later become known as German Impressionism. However, his experience demonstrates that the transmission of visual innovations was more complex than one would expect in retrospect. It is crucial to stress that our current understanding of Paris in the final third, sorry, that was too fast. It is crucial to stress that our current understanding of Paris in the final third of the 19th century, shaped, for example, by the canonical narrative presented in the Impressionist gallery of the Musée d'Orsay, differs fundamentally from the perspective of a young art student in the 1880s. And we've heard that there are some Impressionists from Slovenia who also went to Paris. For many, the private Académie Julian, where also Corinth was, served as the primary point of entry into the Parisian art world, and the experience of Paris was filtered through academic instruction, salon culture, and contemporary critical discourse rather than through the Impressionist exhibitions themselves. This methodological distinction between historical perception and retrospective canonization underlies my approach. In the following minutes, you find we have three short chapters. First, I will talk about Corinth and Munich between Academy and Secession, then about Corinth in Paris, attraction without Impressionism, and then we will go back to the Slovenian artists, Munich as a transnational hub, Slovenian artists, and Kandinsky in Bavaria. Corinth first lived in Munich from 1880 onwards, before moving to Paris in 1884. After several interim stages in Berlin and Königsberg, he finally settled here in Bavaria in 1891, remaining there for a decade. So at the time where also the Slovenian Impressionists were here. At the Munich Academy of Fine Arts, following earlier studies in Königsberg, he initially studied under Franz Defregger and later under Ludwig von Löfts, a former student of Willem von Dietz, and that will also be interesting in the context of Impressionism from Slovenia. Munich's appeal during this period has often been emphasized in scholarship. On the occasion of the 2009-10 exhibition, German Impressionism at Kunsthalle Bielefeld, Birgit Joos characterized Munich as the birthplace of German Impressionism, pointing to the city's exceptional exhibition infrastructure, such as the Glaspalast built in 1854, and to the declining prestige of the Düsseldorf Academy. With Karl von Piloty's appointment as director in 1874, large-scale history painting modeled on French and Belgian examples dominated the Academy, even as the Impressionist exhibitions were taking place in Paris. And please forgive me this rather crude constellations, but I think it helps us to understand what happened at the same time. So in synchronicity, but it's a harsh contrast, of course. At the same time, artists such as the mentioned Wilhelm von Dietz or Ludwig von Löfts represented a moderately modern orientation. They formed a bridge between academic instruction and newer impulses from France and the Netherlands, impulses that were more fully realized outside the academy in the works of Willem Leibl and his circle, but of course quite far away from French Impressionism. For Corinth, Leibl functioned as a guiding star, an artist who combined technical mastery with a commitment to unprejudiced, truthful representation. And he wrote about Leibl, you see in the article on the right, which you can also see in the exhibition one floor below. Institutional reforms in the mid-1880s, including the abolition of the antique class and an increased emphasis on working from life models, contributed to a cautious opening of the academy. Under Löft's directorship from 1891 onwards, contemporary tendencies were approached with greater flexibility, as evidenced by the appointment of Paul Höcker as the first professor of plein air painting. Corinth's own collection of his student years, recorded in his 1908 textbook Das Erlernen der Malerei, so a book about learning how to paint, reveal how strongly the academy remained shaped by a hierarchical master-student system and by the traditional ranking of genres. He writes, so sind seit 3 Jahrzehnten etwa Tiroler Bilder aller Defregger in die Welt gesetzt. Ungezählte Variationen auf den Titel Alm sind von Defregger Schülern wiederholt. Auf der Alm, Abschied, Ankunft von auf der Alm, manches Mal Sennhütte genannt. Ferner Dialektisches wie Grüß dich Gott, das setzt die nieder, oder das einfache Prost auf Süddeutsch Gesundheit. Oder Namen von schönen Tirolerinnen, Katerl, Zenzal, etc. So you see this ironic kind of writing he likes a lot. Die sentimentale Theaterdämonie des Gabriel Max fand ebenfalls Anklang, indem die Malerei um eine erkleckliche Anzahl Märtyrerinnen, die sich verbrennen und von wilden Tieren auffressen lassen, vermehrt wurde. But at the same time he writes about the system of genres, where he writes, akademisch ist auch die Rangeinteilung der Künstler in die sogenannten Historienmaler, Genremaler, Landschaftsmaler etc., dass natürlich auch manches Mal diese akademischen Einrichtungen dennoch Gutes fordern können, ist nicht lobend diesen anzurechnen, sondern dem fatalistischen Schicksal, das Gutes und Böses nach Laune verteilt. So Corinth's critique of academic teaching as a factor for epigones is perceptive, yet it is notable that he does not fundamentally question the genre hierarchy itself, as can be seen by this quotation. The continued orientation towards genre distinction would also shape the artistic production, I would argue, of Slovenian artists, as modern as they were, who were trained in Munich. The founding of the Munich Secession in 1892, in which Corinth participated, created an exhibition platform receptive to Impressionist tendencies, though it would be misleading to understand these developments as a simple adaptation of French models. The stylistic diversity of the secession's founding members, ranging from Franz von Stuck's erotic symbolism to Hans Thomas' conservative neo-idealism, underscores the heterogeneity of artistic positions in Munich at the time. Among the artists later associated with German Impressionism, Max Liebermann was the first to spend extended time in Paris, beginning in 1872. Others followed. Gotthard Kühl, as a painter of Impressionist interiors with strong contrasting light effects in 1878. Lessa Uri, we already heard about him today, as a master of nightly city landscapes with mirroring lights, 1881. Karl Schuch, a painter of Barbizon-like landscapes and almost glowing still lifes, who remained there from 1882 to 1894. Corinth arrived in Paris in 1884 during the period of the final Impressionist exhibition. Yet from everything we know, Corinth did not meaningfully engage with the art of Manet, Degas, Monet, and Pissarro during his Paris years. Instead, as his later writings attest, he oriented himself to salon painting of his teachers Bouguereau and Tony Robert Fleury, as well as towards the naturalism of Jules Bastien Lepage. At the same time, Bastien Lepage was widely celebrated for his combination of photographic precision, subtle light effects, and, not in this case, but in other paintings, socially attentive subject matter. Corinth recalls that exhibitions of Bastien Lepage's work were considered essential viewing for young artists. This selective reception underscores a key point. Paris functioned as a site of professional formation and ambition, but not necessarily as a source of Impressionist influence at that time. The idea of Impressionism as a dominant or unavoidable force in Paris is largely a retrospective construction. And I come to my last short point. The Munich context that shaped Corinth was equally formative for artists from Slovenia. During the 1880s, many young Slovenian artists arrived in Munich, often, we heard it, via Vienna. Anton Aschberg, we heard it, studied at the academy from 1884 to 1890 in the class of Löfts, who was also the teacher of Corinth, before founding his influential private painting school, which became also a focal point for artists from Slovenia. And I show you here on the right the ZE app, which you can download, and it has tours to art historically important places in Munich. And there's also, I found out today, I didn't know that before, there's also a text on the Aschberg school, where you can also see that it was in Georgenstraße and in Türkenstraße also. Drawing in anatomical correct manner was seen as most important in this school, but Aschberg also promoted new ideas of painting, vaguely derived from Impressionist or even symbolist techniques like the Kugelprinzip, reminding us of Cézanne, which hints to the importance of mastering a simple geometric form like a round ball. His idea of Farbkristallization is connected to Impressionist and even one might say divisionist principles, but maybe we would have to discuss, because I'm not an expert at that, by applying unmixed color directly on the canvas. Aschberg's work, although we have seen that, we do not have more than about 15 paintings from him, is interesting insofar, it's interesting for many reasons, but also because there are strong parallels to Corinth's oeuvre. We find, for example, that he painted female nudes, and it's also in the exhibition, of course, in brown and bluish and incarnate tones, like Corinth did, as well as genre-like works in a more or less realistic, impressionistic manner with a special interest in interior light effects, like Corinth. And we have also seen her, the wonderful dark-colored woman in a pensive, maybe melancholic state that reminds us of a painting by Corinth from the 1880s entitled Othello, Ein Othello. Besides, it is interesting to note that not only the Slovenian Impressionists attended his school, but also Vasily Kandinsky, born in 1866, so some years younger than Corinth, who came to Munich in December 1869 with his first wife, Anna. From 1897 to 1899, he attended Aschberg's school, where he met Jawlensky and Igor Grabar. We do not have many paintings from that time of Kandinsky, in fact, almost none. One of his first paintings from 1898, named Odessa Hafen, indeed shows a peculiar mixture of an impressionist evocation of, here we have it, a peculiar evocation of a harbor on a hazy day with a rippling water surface and a striving for an almost abstract design of the canvas with brightly and darkly colored shapes. Paintings such as Kochel Wasserfall 1 play even more emphatically with a tension between depth, represented by the waterfall coming from the distance, and then also an almost arabesque surface design created by the meandering brush strokes that are supposed to characterize the woods and the riverbed. So there are some, neo-impressionist tendencies here. And that also speaks to the openness of Aschberg to new artistic styles. Although he, like the Slovenian Impressionists, was taken with the teacher's pedagogical and attentive manner, the anatomy class, which he attended twice, did not correspond to what Kandinsky was looking for in his search for his own visual language. The drawn nudes of Kandinsky of that time give an impression of his striving towards a geometrical simplification in the rendering of the human body. I come to an end. Ivana Kobilca arrived. Oh, sorry, should have shown you that before. So this is the waterfall. And now I cannot, no, it works now. Ivana Kobilca arrived in Munich in 1881 and studied at a private ladies' painting school. Like Corinne, she was temporarily influenced by Bastien Lepage and succeeded in exhibiting works at the Paris Salon. Josef Petkovšek studied at the Munich Academy after a brief stay in Venice, like, for example, Schuch, who was also there, and later went to Paris, where he took private lessons with Cabanel and Boulanger. Ferdo Wessel followed a similar path, studying in Munich from 1884 to 88. Artists of a younger generation, such as Matthij Sternen, 4 years younger than Kandinsky, arrived later, enrolling in Aschbe's school in 1899, the same year Corinne first visited the Berlin Succession. So, to come to an end, these parallel trajectories underscore, I would say, Munich's role as a mediating space in which the academic training, very selective Parisian influences, and emerging modern tendencies intersect. I would like to mention one more point which seems to me worth influencing. As the example of Kandinsky's time in Aschbe's school suggests, the personal and artistic links between figures we tend to assign to different categories and stylistic strands are often far closer than our conventional narratives imply. The more closely we examine these networks, the more connections emerge between artists commonly perceived as rooted in 19th century traditions, such as so-called German Impressionists, and figures like Kandinsky, whose work, particularly after his first abstract paintings, appears decisively oriented towards the future. This becomes especially evident when we consider exhibition practices around 1900. The third Phalanx exhibition in the summer of 1902, organized by Kandinsky, was devoted to Corinth and Wilhelm Trübner, while the seventh focused on Monet. Even within this brief time span, we encounter a dazzling coexistence of artists' works and stylistic ideals that art history has often separated into successive or opposing categories. This observation, I would argue, has broader implications for how we conceptualize Impressionism in an international perspective and in its various national variants, including German and Slovenian Impressionism. While it is undoubtedly true that something decisive occurred in Paris in the 1870s that altered the course of art history, Impressionism itself was never solely a product of French or Parisian culture. It was shaped by a process of hybridization, drawing on diverse historical and geographical traditions. Manet's engagement with Spanish painting, Monet's and Degas' interest in Japanese prints, Renoir's fascination with Rubens, to hint to just a few examples. These artists did not construct national frontiers in order to define an art that was French, German, or Slovenian. Rather, such boundaries were often imposed retrospectively by art history itself, and now I think we are deconstructing these boundaries. Recognizing this way allows us to approach Impressionism less as a set of national styles and more as a dynamic field of exchange, mediation, and overlap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I forgot to mention before that we have also some online participants with us. So I greet them kindly as well. And now we will start the discussion. So Slovenian Impressionists or Slovenian painters, and what did Kandinsky have to do with it? My first question is, as you mentioned, I will start with you. Like Impressionism was shaped also by the processes of hybridization and so on, and Impressionism as European phenomenon. We hear and see lately many exhibitions. There was an exhibition in Chemnitz in the frames of the European Cultural Capital called European Realities, which showed us that realism or Neue Sachlichkeit was not a German phenomenon, but was a European phenomenon. And as these connections were crucial, and exchange and so on, and mobility like today. So I want to ask you, what can you tell us about the fact that even though in the art history today scholars are aware of this that all these isms and so on are European phenomenon, this is still a kind of some regions or some artists are still taken out of that and still maybe ignored from the art history that is written from Western perspective still, even though there is 30 years since the Berlin Wall came down and so on. So please, yes.
Thank you. I think
you have, huh?
So
okay.
In my case, you can hear me without a microphone. Yes, I think it's a very important question with many facets and many factors, but I would just like to hint to one or two. First of all, we have to understand that French Impressionism in the beginning was a way of artists, as you all know, of fighting against the academic system. So when French Impressionism became the dominant or one of the dominant or the dominant trend of modernity, we also have to keep in mind how important for the museum world of France and of Paris the idea of patrimoine was. So it also means that it's a national heritage you work on it, and that's very different to the German idea of working on, for example, so-called German Impressionism, where the idea of patrimoine is not that important. That's the one thing. And the other thing we have to keep in mind is the term German Impressionism, which is so important for the reception of figures like Liebermann and Corinth. It was coined also from the art market. So quite probably it was Cassirer, Paul Cassirer, who invented this idea of the three stars of German Impressionism, Liebermann, Slevogt, and Corinth, in order to sell them and in order to show them together. And in the exhibition, we show that this myth of the three stars of German Impressionism exists until today, because there are still many, many exhibitions that work with this idea. And at the same time, last short remark, writers like Julius Meyer-Graefe, they, in a certain way, were arguing against this idea of focusing too much on national schools. Of course, he was fighting for French art, also the reception of French art in Germany, but he always had in mind this idea of a musée imaginaire of artists who are working not within national frontiers, but with all the other artists from Europe and beyond in their mind.
Yes, it's very interesting that they were connected and open and cosmopolitic, but at the same time, like in the Slovenian case, very emancipatory. So they are considered as national artists. And this is interesting because mainly this is in the domain of the literature, also in Slovenia and Germany, like Goethe and so on. But in Slovenia, the Impressionists got this status for being emancipatory for the national identity. Please, Mr. Burkart, can you explain?
Well, in a way, I could say that Slovenian Impressionism joined the European to Slovenian painting tradition to European art at that time. But basically, the issue of nationality was probably peculiar in Austro-Hungarian Empire, because it was a multinational entity, and I think between 1900 and 1904, 1899, 1904, the liberal government hoped to sort of pull together the centripetal tendencies within empire by cultural concessions, and that modern art would perform that role effectively. And in the end, it didn't happen that way, but that shows in state patronage of art. From Mitke exhibition, there were 3 paintings that were purchased by the state, and those purchases determined the value of their painting in the market afterwards. And in broader culture, it's as well in literature, the issue of national identity is a little bit different. Small nations wanted to even lean again, or take the French example, understanding the national patrimony in that sense, in opposition to the situation in the empire.
Yes, because Slovenia, of course, obviously was the part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't. And yes, thank you for mentioning Mitke's exhibition in Vienna. And Franz Servaes wrote at that time, so surprises happen after all. Suddenly an entire Austrian art province has been freshly discovered. So this relationship between the center and the province at that time, is this the reason? What do you think? Even today, is it felt like that already today, that this was some kind of art from the province, and that's why it was forgotten?
I only wanted to add one sentence to this national thing, because I worked on the exhibition and found these quotations that the Slovenian Impressionists for the first time depicted the Slovenian land, the Slovenian feeling, the melancholy in the landscape. And I think this is very interesting, because also for the Slovenians, then the Habsburger Reich, but for the people living there, finding or watching their homeland and seeing their landscape in these paintings. And this, I think, is very important for the success afterwards, after the Mitke exhibition.
Well, there are some circumstances that might be illuminating too. Servaes writes further on, if you board the train on Southern Südbahnhof, then beyond Celje, you see this primal countryside with deep gorges and cliffs and so on and so forth. And to me, it always seemed a bit of an exaggeration. But Mitke owned a mansion near Celje, Dobrnica, near Dobrna Spa, which is in a narrow gorge with fantastic landscape. And I think that Servaes must have visited Mitke there and got this strong impression of the landscape, which he used then explaining the lyrical character of the painting of Slovenian Impressionists.
What is also interesting is that Slovenian Impressionists learned from the German Impressionists. not directly from French Impressionists. Munich was a very important city at that time with a special vibe, and that's why it attracted. It was open, like you mentioned, and so on. You said to me, yeah, it was like a mediator city. What do you, as a scholar, find interesting in what was said today about the Slovenian Impressionists?
Well, I think this whole idea of understanding how much this time was a time of people traveling and trying to discover very, very different sceneries, very different artistic ways of painting. It was really a time, I mean, we have trains in that time. Even people who don't have that much money, like artists, could afford to go to other cities by train to visit Paris. That wouldn't have been possible for a huge number of people before. And so we have this whole process of like a bursting of creative inspiration from one artist to the other, which on the one hand creates a style, and I think that's interesting, which is common to many. I mean, if you look at these paintings, if you're not used to it, you could say, oh, maybe that's a Monet I didn't know before. So it's also a losing of national traditions. But on the other hand, we have this hybridization, and we have also, especially in the case, if you look closer on the Slovenian artists, something which German Impressionism wouldn't have, for example, this like melancholic landscape. I mean, we have the brightest colors in pastel colors, and at the same time, there is a certain melancholy because the people they depict seem lonely in this vast landscape. So on the one hand, hybridization and also mixture of styles. On the other hand, yes, there's still something very special about it.
How much were Bavarian or German artists from that time aware of the Slovenian artists? Obviously, from Ashbe, about Ashbe, they were very aware because he was a connector. He was he was a kind of, today we would say networking, figure. But what about the German artists? How much they were really aware of their value and,
In that time, you mean? So I can't answer this question because I don't know. Perhaps somebody could make us research about this. But I think it was not really important from where they came, because it was like they came from everywhere. So the school at Ashbe, there were hundreds of pupils from everywhere internationally, like from America, from Sweden, from France, from Russia, from Slovenia. And I'm not sure if they talked about this from where they come, but perhaps you have another idea.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't mean just Ashbe school. I meant the influences, like also the ones that you mentioned, that were obviously very much, similar, because of the similarities. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting that Jakobic's group, the Sava Club, they insisted at Mitke's not to use national denomination. They didn't want to be Slowenische Künstler, and Mitke insisted because of political understanding and his connections with the ministries and cultural. He was member of secession, and he was making the living on that, and he insisted that they subtitled the exhibition Slowenische Künstler, and Slovenian Sava Club was the last in a line of presentations of Slavic schools in Viennese galleries.
I found it interesting that you mentioned to me today, when we were going through the exhibition, that the Dachauer moss actually
they were looking for it when they went back to Slovenia. They were looking for the same landscape. Yeah.
Maybe if I, oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
No, if I just, I would like to add one thought, because we always have, I think, to keep in mind that at times it can be for artists, if we think about self-fashioning, about, I mean, of course, it was an artistic search for them, but at the same time, they had to sell. They had to sell their works, and they had to sell also their personality. And we saw it with this great picture of the smoking female artists around 1900. That's a great way of self-fashioning, of presenting oneself as an emancipated woman. So what I wanted to say, that at times it could be interesting for them to play with this idea of a national identity, for example, being a bit exotic for people in Munich, coming from eastern regions. At other time, it might also have been embarrassing for him. And in that case, of course, Lovis Corinth is interesting. He was coming from East Prussia, and he was very clever in a certain way, that he never tried to hide the fact that he was not from Paris and not from Berlin, but from a very, very rural place in East Prussia. And he played with this idea, and he showed himself to the people as being a little bit exotic for the decadent aesthetic Munich art scene. So maybe it's interesting not just to keep in mind that it was art sellers, art dealers, art historians who coined them with national identities, but also the artists themselves who, in a certain way, even played with the national identities.
They were opportunistic. Yes, and that was great disappointment for Slovenian audience when so-called revisionists in the 90s started to write about but specific circumstances, and there's going about promoting their art.
Finding back to your question.
Yeah, to Dachauer Moss. Yeah.
Dachau,
This fascination.
I think it's the Bavarian word for more marshlands. I think it's an important fact, or the closeness to the big city. It's every time the same with the artist's colony. You have the big city, and then you have the beautiful landscape. But the artists need the big city to sell their art, and because of this, they don't go even further because they want to reach by train or in the beginning by foot. And I found it very interesting that Škofja Loka is like it was called the Barbizon of Slovenia. And this was also like an artist colony, because all the Slovenian Impressionists went there and lived there and worked there. And this after getting or going to Dachau and finding this life of artists colony there. And I think,
but also it was appropriate for its amenities. It was the town with modern water supply. It was a town with electric illumination as one of the first in Slovenia. It featured 2 Viennese-type cafes where art magazines were available, and the post office was very effective. You could exchange letters with Vienna within 3 days.
The post was more efficient at that time.
Today.
Even in Berlin, I read 2 times a day. You could receive, you could send and receive in the same day, and now it's not possible. Now I have a question. Ivana Kubilca, I need to mention her. She was, very interesting artist, also because of her lifestyle. Not only as a painter, but as a woman, her sexual, lifestyle and so on. She was very unusual. She was at the Venice Biennale. She was having many exhibitions in Paris at the Salon Paris, in Kunstverein Berlin, in Glass Palace here. Then she lived abroad in Sarajevo, etc. In Ljubljana. She was traveling, or in Paris, where she lived with Rosa Pfeffinger, and she was a friend of Käthe Kollwitz, and yet she is completely unknown here still. Why is that so?
I'm also asking this myself very often, but we have in Dachau the same problem. My colleague Jutta Mannes is also here, and she's expert on the question on women in Dachau, because in Dachau there were many private schools, and also with Adolf Hölzel, who had his school, and other artists. And as women could not study at the academy, they went to the private schools, for example, with Hölzel. And there were many women, many female artists in Dachau that studied there, and they are forgotten. So it's, I think, a thing of the, like you said in your lecture, that it's afterwards, and with the art history, it's the problem that in the first years, nobody thought that women could also be good artists.
But yeah, but that can be changed. I mean, there's a young generation who could work on it.
Okay, well, she was also a feminist, no? And she was really present for a long time.
Yes,
No?
yeah.
That's why. Okay, I understand that, but why HB is not present in the consciousness here in München and Bayern and in Germany? I do not understand. Yeah.
Perhaps it's also a problem of works that are to be seen, that are they are lost. Many works are lost, and it's because of Munich as like the hotspot of this modern era, and so many artists that got famous, and there was so much cultural life that it's like a filter. It's only my impression, but I think it's difficult with HB because of his, because there are so less works. Yeah, you can find not so many works.
HB's production was very small. That's the first fact. And part of his production was lost. We lost track of it. We have archival evidence that he had buyers in Berlin. There was, for instance, a full-scale portrait of his first teacher in Ljubljana, Janez Wolf, which was sold to Berlin, and some other paintings. And we don't know whether they still exist. But sometimes paintings do resurface. It happened with Kubilca in that way. But Kubilca really exhibited internationally after 1890, through beginning of the new century. And she would very often send her successful paintings on the summer, and the women who iron were usually her prime pieces that appeared from gallery to gallery. But it's a fact, she was by far the most successful Slovenian artist in terms of exhibiting. That's...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for great keynotes, and for taking part at this talk. And thank you very much, dear audience, for listening, for getting to know the Slovenian artists that lived and worked here more than 100 years ago. And I hope with this contribution, we made them more visible and that this is just a start. Thank you very much to all of you.